Thank you, Rick Reeves, and congratulations again to Dr. Fred Ziv. Now, in keeping with our theme this year of managing change, it's my pleasure to introduce to you our keynote speaker, a man whose dynamic career parallels the constant creative and business changes in our industry. As Vice President of Primetime Television for ABC, he pioneered made-for-TV movies and novels for television, now known as miniseries. As Chairman and CEO of Paramount Pictures, he brought new vitality to the motion picture business and helped grow the company into the diversified entertainment giant that it is today. He's been Chairman and CEO of Fox Incorporated since 1984, back when the idea of a fourth network was called crazy and not crazy like a fox. But our speaker pursued his own vision, building a successful station group and indeed a fourth national television service. Please welcome a man who has not merely managed constructive change, but envisioned it and brought it about, Mr. Barry Diller.
Thank you. I may be very provincial, but it seems to me a megatrend is Gary Lieberthal moving eastward. I know you all want to get to the anything but love booth, so I'll be as quick as I can. Good morning. It is perhaps dangerous for me to speak at industry gatherings. Recently, I sat on a seemingly harmless little panel at the opening of the Western Cable Show. The subject of pay-per-view movies was innocently raised. Thoughtlessly, prodded by instinct, certainly not brains, I offered the view that everyone should get on with it, experiment, and even consider opening a movie for a lot of money on pay as a preview to its theatrical exhibition. Well, by the time I got back to the studio, the entire motion picture business, the trades, the exhibitors, everyone was in a state of near hysteria. The idea that we'd preview our films anywhere before they opened on the widescreen had reduced our theatrical distribution staff to something closely resembling catatonia. And so I spent the next 3 days apologizing to those I offended and emphasizing the grays and unknowns of future pay television. That was in November in California, and now it's January, and I'm in New Orleans and maybe about to do it again. I'm not going to try and reinvent the wheel today, though I delude myself at all times to think that I could. I'm not going to try to spur you on to new program heights so you can, like we did, create programs as humanistically enlightening as Studs. Everything I'm going to say is known, empirical, discovered. And yet there are crisscrossing and I believe important events going on in our industry whose understanding oddly eludes us. As a beginning, you may find the following, as I do, both startling and at the same time strangely obvious. It is this. For 143 million Americans, 143 million people, television, all television, is now a pay service. 60% of America now writes a check every month to receive its television, including the programs of affiliates, independents, superstations, and public broadcasters. Distinctions between free over-the-air television and pay cable television are fast fading. Older people, like you and me, still think we understand the difference between broadcasting and cable. Younger people get it completely. They know only that they have a television, a remote control, and a monthly bill. And the only difference between a program they like on CBS and one on MTV is the time it takes to electronically leap from one to the other. Now, all of this would be only mildly interesting speech babble if it were not so important to understand that we are going through a transition. It's hard to see clearly because we're all together passing in the middle of it, living our daily crazy lives. But we've got to slow down, way down, and see that we're at a critical juncture, a transition from a universal television system available to only those who pay, like any other commodity. The great danger is that we will screw up this transition and really lose forever, and never be able to replace what was valuable in the old as we get caught up in the excitement and diversity of the new. The reality is that broadcasting has become simply one element of pay television. And that leads me to four simple and unarguable words. Broadcasters gotta get paid. Because if they don't get a second stream of income beyond advertising support, they will eventually go out of business. They will. It's unthinkable that we would not act to change U.S. copyright law, which presently literally prevents broadcasters from being included in television's new economic order. It is unthinkable and unacceptable that we would allow 100 million Americans who can't afford or don't wish to subscribe to cable to lose their opportunity to be informed and entertained. And if we don't act, the government may need to begin issuing cable stamps for the less affluent as the next component of our federal social safety net. I'm not arguing for protectionism or urging the propping up of any bloated or irrelevant competitor, nor will you hear me attack cable. But we must reform our copyright mess before it inflicts further damage on broadcasting. We're all weary of the endless television wars, fin-sin, must-carry, channel positioning, Syndex, on and on and on. But these long and boring fights are essentially irrelevant compared to what is at stake here. After all, the fight over financial interest and syndication rights in network shows won't be fun anymore if the networks are gone. And you can't scream over must-carry or channel positioning for a local broadcaster who's out of business. Part of the difficulty in figuring out what to do is that everything is wrong with our semantics and our definitions. Television is television. It all comes out of the same box. And a majority of people pay for it, period. And while advertising, one subset is in a slump, television, all television, is growing in this country and all over the world. So what's the problem? The problem is that the 143 million viewers who write a monthly check for television spend a majority of their time watching broadcast programs. But broadcasters and their program suppliers are not being compensated for the value they deliver. The game is rigged, and the issue is simple. What people watch when they turn on their televisions is the value for which they pay. And in any rational and sane system, the payment must follow the viewing. You can't tell me that what people watch 60 or 70% of the time has no value, but what they watch 30% of the time does. Broadcasting is not less valuable than narrowcasting. Only a fool would argue the USA Network is worth more than NBC unless viewers begin to watch it 10 times more than they do now, every hour. In free markets such as ours, the payment of money is the way in which consumers signal their likes and dislikes. And the fundamental problem is that, as things now stand, the process of voting for programs by viewing is divorced from the process of dividing the money. This perverse distortion creates truly loony consequences. A few years ago, an executive of a non-broadcast network actually boasted in an interview that he didn't have to worry about ratings because his network revenue needs were covered by long-term subscription agreements with cable operators. In other words, he didn't have to worry about whether people actually watched his shows. A system in which consumer preferences matter this little is genuinely loony. Take the example of ABC News. Like the promos say, more people choose to get their news from ABC than any other source. Now, I don't want to knock CNN. I have enormous respect for their initiative and boldness. There is a value to a 24-hour exclusive news channel. But there's a real problem here. Ted Turner is on the cover of Time magazine, which he deserves, and Roone Arledge is forced, because advertising alone cannot support its true value, to arbitrarily cut back his terrific organization, which he does not deserve. And this example gets repeated across the broadcast spectrum. Young viewers cast their vote by watching Beverly Hills 90210 on Fox, and their dollars get diverted to MTV. Sports fans watch a baseball game on CBS, and the money goes to ESPN. If we don't act to fix this problem now, right now, then the best broadcast programming will begin forced migration to a pure pay environment, and we will totally disenfranchise the 100 million Americans who rely solely on broadcasting for their television. Advertising alone can barely generate the revenues needed to maintain our broadcast system. I promise you that as fragmentation of viewing continues, it won't just be more downsizing and whaling that you'll hear about, but the actual extinction of the system. Somewhere in television, there's got to be a critical mass large enough to support the news and entertainment all America has come to depend upon. With all its flaws, we have that system now. And to those who say, where is it written that these entities live by divine right? I say that the program funding base that these so-called dinosaurs represent will not be easily duplicated. And that's just a fact. It's not poor-mouthing, it's not whining, it's just true. So you say, all right, enough of this harangue. You've convinced me. We've got to fix things. How do we do it? The answer is remarkably simple. Repeal the compulsory license. It doesn't require the passage of any new government laws or regulations. And don't let the lawyers and lobbyists, or even the real people, tell you that it's difficult or complicated, because it's not. We don't need a bailout for broadcasters, a subsidy for Hollywood, or a bigger gravy train for cable. All we need is for the government to remove its clumsy and heavy hand from the program marketplace so that everyone can compete. How would the new world work? Would it be a big mess, a transactional nightmare, with cable operators and broadcasters forced into hundreds of thousands of difficult negotiations? Would the Super Bowl be held hostage to network extortion? The answer is no. Without compulsory license, broadcasters would become rights-clearing intermediaries between program suppliers and cable operators. This is exactly what happens today in transactions between program suppliers and cable networks where there is no compulsory license. No mess, no transactional burdens, just pure, proven commerce. The simplest of ideas usually generate the greatest amount of skepticism. And so it has been with the idea of repealing compulsory license. The studios expressed the fear that in a free market, cable operators would possess such power that they would extract retransmission rights without paying anything, or that the all-powerful networks would keep all the money in the pot. Broadcasters think Hollywood would end up with all the money. And my cable friends fear that the strongest stations would hold out for a king's ransom. Frankly, it amazes me that so many competent people who prize operating so well without government interference in every other aspect of their business are all so fearful of freely negotiating these simple issues. Free markets are usually messier than markets managed by government regulation. But to the studios who fear that broadcasters are so dependent upon cable carriage that they would give away the store, I would say that a cable network like USA is even more dependent upon cable carriage than is any broadcaster. Yet somehow, USA manages to negotiate healthy subscriber fees. To the broadcasters who fear that Hollywood would keep all the money, I would point to the profitable cable networks who manage to negotiate cable rights in the programs they license and still keep enough money to make a profit. To my friends in cable who fear they won't be able to make a deal with a strong station, I would first ask how they can possibly justify continuing to take a station like that for nothing, and then point to their ability to come to terms with such must-have services as CNN and ESPN. And finally, to my studio colleagues who still perceive the broadcast networks as all-powerful, I would say get real. We are convinced that in the end, program producers, broadcasters, and cable operators would all succeed in concluding satisfactory arrangements. The toughest part will be persuading cable that its best interests will be served by ending the compulsory license. But I think that case can be made. Everyone in cable tells us that they expect to face increasing competition from phone companies and others. Program exclusivity, long established as a principle in the entertainment industry, is more than likely the way cable and other video distributors will compete in the future. It's tough for cable to justify exclusivity for its own programs while it uses the programs of broadcasters through a forced license. And it won't help either broadcasting or cable to leave the compulsory license laying around to be picked up by the telephone companies. If they want to compete, let them bid. There is another reason for cable to be cooperative. Almost 20 years ago, an infant cable industry got a boost from the compulsory license. The goal was to foster diversity, and it worked. Today, that same goal of diversity requires the opposite action, repeal of the license, to assure the survival of the great mass program engines of television. For the good of our country's great system of communications, in which they now play such a leading role, cable operators should join in this just cause. And finally, why am I making this argument? Why do I care so much? I think it's the memory of my early days at ABC 25 years ago, when I watched men like Leonard Goldenson and Elton Rule, and first realized that there was something that set them apart from other businessmen, something unique and honorable. It was that the word broadcaster carried with it special obligations and historic public interest responsibilities that these men, these broadcasters, and many of you and me, the best part of me, understand in our bones and know shouldn't become a relic of this modern age. Television is television, and subscriber fees are the new economic foundation of the business. Broadcasters got to get paid. Broadcasting is worth saving. Repeal the compulsory license. The sooner, the better. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Diller.